Through the artfully arranged fronds of a potted palm, I saw him. Marcus, my Marcus. No, not my Marcus, never truly mine, as it turned out. He glided into the restaurant with the easy confidence of a man who believed the world owed him its best table. On his arm, a woman whose youth was as striking as her décolletage. Her laughter, a high, brittle sound, scraped across the otherwise sophisticated ambiance. He scanned the room, his gaze sweeping past me, lingering for a moment on a portly man I knew to be a potential investor, then moving on. He didn't see me. Not yet. He saw a silhouette, a woman with an air of quiet command perhaps, but not the ghost of his carefully buried past. He wouldn't recognize the predator hidden beneath the Chanel. Not until the precise moment I chose. This wasn't chance. Oh no. Every detail of this accidental encounter had been orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. A discreet word to a mutual acquaintance in the financial sector about my new, rather successful investment firm. A casual, offhand mention by one of my lawyers to one of his, hinting at a new player in town looking for promising, if slightly distressed, ventures. Silas was his preferred hunting ground for investors, a place where he felt powerful and control. Tonight, the control was mine. As they were led towards a table not far from mine, another small arrangement courtesy of a well-placed gratuity. I watched him. The years had been kind, superficially. His suit was impeccable, Italian no doubt. His hair, still thick, was now distinguished by flecks of silver at the temples, an effect I knew he cultivated. But I saw the subtle tells, the ones no tailor or expensive barber could erase. The slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand as he pulled out the chair for his companion, a tremor I knew appeared when he was under pressure, or about to launch into a particularly egregious lie. The faint sheen of perspiration on his upper lip, despite the restaurant's perfectly climate-controlled air. The way his eyes darted, just a fraction too quickly around the room, assessing, always assessing. His cologne, a heavy, musky scent I'd once found alluring, now seemed to choke the air, a desperate attempt to mask the anxiety that clung to him like a second skin. He settled, preening slightly as the young woman gazed at him with an adoration that was almost painful to watch. She probably thought he was a god. I knew him as the devil who'd worn an angel's face. He finally noticed me when the sommelier, another pawn in my game, paused by my table, inquiring if Miss Hayes required another bottle of the Sancerre. The name, my new name, hung in the air. Marcus's head turned. Just a flicker of curiosity at first. Then, a polite, dismissive glance. He was about to turn away, back to his fawning date, when I made my move. I looked directly at him, a cool, neutral expression on my face. And then, with a slowness that felt deliciously theatrical, I removed my sunglasses. Large, dark shielding. My armor. I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray beneath the expensive tan. His smile, the one he'd been bestowing on his companion, froze, then shattered like fragile glass. The fork he'd just picked up clattered against his plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden pocket of silence that seemed to envelop their table. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. The woman beside him, her brow furrowed in confusion, looked from his stricken face to me, then back again. Olivia? The name was a choked whisper, a sound torn from his throat. It was a name I hadn't answered to in years, a name that belonged to a woman he had destroyed. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch my lips. Not quite, Marcus. My voice was calm, measured, each syllable perfectly enunciated. The voice of a stranger. The name is Miss Hayes, Ava Hayes, and I believe we have a business meeting. I gestured with a perfectly manicured hand to the empty chairs at my larger, more strategically placed table. Or rather, you have a meeting with your new primary investor. His pallor was fascinating. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a raw, stark terror. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, and in a way he had. The ghost of the wife he'd systematically gaslighted, drugged, and committed to a private institution to get his hands on her inheritance. The wife he'd told everyone, including her own family, was dangerously, irrevocably insane. His companion was now looking thoroughly bewildered and increasingly annoyed. "Marcus, darling, who is this?" she asked, her voice sharp. Marcus didn't seem to hear her. He was still staring at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying comprehension. "Investor?" he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "Indeed," I said, my tone light, almost breezy. "Your company, Thorn Industries, is, shall we say, in dire straits. I'm here to offer a lifeline." I watched him struggle to reconcile the woman before him, elegant, composed, radiating an aura of quiet power and immense wealth, with the trembling, terrified creature he had last seen being led away in a haze of medication. Their hushed, then abruptly silent conversation. My calm pronouncement had not gone unnoticed. I could feel the discreet, assessing glances from other tables. Influential men and women, the very people Marcus was desperate to impress, were now looking at him, then at me, their expressions shifting from polite interest to keen speculation. His credibility, already fragile, was now hanging by a thread, and I held the scissors. He stumbled to his feet, muttering a garbled apology to his date, who looked ready to storm out. "Perhaps," he said, his voice strained, "we could discuss this in a more private setting." "Nonsense, Marcus," I replied, my smile widening slightly. "Transparency is so important in business, don't you think? Besides, I believe Mr. Albright over there." I nodded discreetly towards the portly investor he'd noticed earlier, and Mrs. Chen from Sterling Group might find this illuminating. Both Albright and Chen were now watching with undisguised interest. Marcus visibly flinched. He sank into the chair opposite me, his movements jerky, uncoordinated. His hand trembled against the pristine white tablecloth. I pushed a slim, embossed leather folder across the table. "The preliminary paperwork. My lawyers are quite thorough." He fumbled with the clasp, his fingers clumsy. Inside, nestled among the boilerplate and legalese, were the clauses. The beautiful, vicious little clauses my legal team, the best in the country, had so artfully embedded. Clauses that, once he signed, would give me not just a significant stake, but effective controlling interest in Thorn Industries. He wouldn't see it, not yet. He was too desperate, too shocked. He'd see only the numbers, the lifeline. I produced a heavy, gold-nibbed fountain pen from my clutch, a Mont Blanc, his favorite. Or it used to be. The weight of it in my hand felt substantial, satisfying. "Shall we?" I murmured. He stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he took it. The scratch of the nib on the thick, creamy paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Each stroke of his signature was another nail in the coffin of his arrogance. When he was done, he pushed the folder back as if it burned him. He looked older, defeated. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a dazed confusion. "How?" he finally asked, the word barely a breath. "How are you here? How are you this?" "Oh, Marcus," I said, leaning back in my chair, taking a slow sip of my wine. "We have so much to discuss." I let my gaze drift around the restaurant, at the subtly lit artwork, the quiet opulence. But for now, let's just say I had a rather transformative experience. As we prepared to part ways, his companion long gone, a storm of bewildered indignation in her wake, he looked at me, a flicker of his old manipulative self trying to reassert itself. "Olivia, Ava, whoever you are now, how have you been? Truly, since, the treatment." The question was laced with a cloying, false concern that made my skin crawl. I met his gaze, holding it, letting him see the abyss that now resided where my old affection used to be. I smiled then, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips that held no warmth, only the iciest, most profound satisfaction. "I died in that place, Marcus," I said softly, my voice a silken caress that could cut steel. "Every part of the woman you knew, the woman you tried to erase, perished there. The woman you're doing business with now, she's someone else entirely. Someone you haven't begun to understand." Just then, his phone, lying forgotten on the table, buzzed with a sharp, insistent notification. He glanced down, his eyes widening. A banking alert? A substantial seven-figure sum, the first tranche of my investment, had already been transferred to Thorn Industries' depleted accounts. His head snapped up, his expression a mixture of disbelief, dawning hope, and a new, deeper fear. The question, unspoken but deafening, hung in the air between us, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and impending doom. What did I really want? Revenge, redemption, or something far more complex, far more devastating? He looked at me, searching for an answer, but my face was a perfect, serene mask. Let him wonder, let him sweat. The game had only just begun. The memories, even now, came in shards, sharp-edged and piercing. Marcus, my husband, the man I'd vowed to love, honor, and cherish, had been the conductor of an orchestra of cruelty, each note meticulously planned to unravel my sanity. His gaslighting wasn't a sudden storm, it was a slow, insidious drizzle that soaked through the very fabric of my being. It began with small things, easily dismissed. "Olivia, darling, I told you about that dinner weeks ago. Don't you remember?" He'd say. His brow furrowed with feigned concern when I questioned a social engagement I had no recollection of. Or, "You're becoming so forgetful, love. Maybe you should see someone." Keys would vanish from their usual spot on the hall table, only to reappear in my coat pocket days later, accompanied by his sigh of exasperation. "Always misplacing things, aren't you?" Then it escalated, a creeping tide of doubt. When I started questioning his increasingly late nights at the office, the hushed, secretive phone calls that would abruptly end the moment I walked into the room, his explanations were always plausible, always reasonable. And always, always, they came with a subtle undermining of my perceptions. "You're imagining things again, Olivia," he'd say, his voice calm, almost gentle, but his eyes, those beautiful hazel eyes I'd once adored, would turn cold, distant, like chips of ice. "You're just tired, stressed. Why don't you take one of those pills Dr. Evans prescribed? They seem to help." He'd masterfully isolate me from friends, from family, subtly poisoning their perception of me. "Olivia's not been herself lately," I'd later learn he'd told them. "A bit fragile, prone to anxieties." He painted me as unstable, paranoid, a burden. And the most terrifying part? The slow, creeping horror as I began to believe him. My reality fractured, my confidence eroded until I was a trembling, uncertain shadow of my former self, questioning every thought, every instinct. The reflection in the mirror became a stranger, her eyes wide with a fear I couldn't name but felt in every fiber of my being. His coldness when he'd look at me, not with love, but with a chilling kind of pity mixed with something darker, something I couldn't decipher then but now recognized as contempt, still haunted the edges of my waking dreams, a constant, bitter reminder. Dr. Alistair Langley. The name itself tasted like ashes in my mouth. Marcus's old college roommate, a bond of shared histories and, as I later discovered, shared ruthlessness. Marcus had presented him as a concerned friend, someone who could help me through this difficult patch. Langley's office was a monument to sterile detachment. Walls painted a bland, forgettable beige. Furniture that was functional but utterly devoid of warmth or personality. The only sound, apart from our voices, was the relentless, dry scratch of his pen on his notepad as I sat opposite him, my hands twisting in my lap, my voice a desperate, trembling thread as I tried to explain. I tried to tell him about the inconsistencies, the lost time, the subtle shifts in Marcus's behavior, the growing unease that gnawed at my insides. He'd listen, his head tilted at that infuriatingly condescending angle, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional empathy that never, not once, reached his eyes. "Olivia," he'd intone, his voice a smooth, anodyne baritone, "these feelings of persecution, the belief that your husband is somehow working against you, these are classic indicators of paranoid ideation. It's not uncommon in cases of acute stress and anxiety." He never questioned Marcus's narrative, the carefully woven tapestry of lies about my deteriorating mental state. He'd nod, jot down another note, and prescribe higher doses of medication that left me feeling foggy, disconnected, further adrift from my own mind. The diagnosis of paranoid delusional disorder with secondary anxiety was delivered with a chilling certainty. The commitment papers signed with an almost casual efficiency. He was the veneer of legitimacy, the medical professional who rubber-stamped Marcus's treachery. The memory of his office, the scent of old paper and faint antiseptic cleaner, the rhythmic scratch, scratch, scratch of his pen was a recurring nightmare. Vanessa, my best friend since we were giggling schoolgirls sharing secrets and dreams. She was the sister I never had, the one I turned to for everything. When the cracks in my marriage began to show, when the shadows of doubt started to lengthen, it was Vanessa I confided in. I'd sit in her sun-drenched kitchen, tears streaming down my face, pouring out my fears about Marcus, about my own unraveling sanity. "He says I'm imagining it, Vanny," I'd sobbed. "Am I going crazy?" She'd hold my hand, her expression a perfect mirror of concern, her voice soothing. "Oh, Liv, my poor darling. Of course you're not crazy, you're just under immense pressure. He's probably just stressed from work." She'd make tea, offer platitudes, and listen. Or so I thought. All the while, she was meeting Marcus. Secret lunches, whispered phone calls. She wasn't just aware of his affair with the young intern from his office. She was actively enabling it, providing alibis, covering his tracks. "Olivia's been a bit overwrought lately," she'd tell their mutual acquaintances, echoing Marcus's narrative. "We're all very worried about her." The ultimate betrayal came during the commitment proceedings. Her testimony, delivered with a tearful, convincing performance of a heartbroken friend forced to speak a painful truth, was damning. She spoke of my erratic behavior, my wild accusations, my increasing detachment from reality. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, poisoning the well of my credibility. The memory of her favorite honeysuckle perfume, a scent I'd once associated with summer afternoons and shared laughter, now triggered a wave of visceral nausea. It was the fragrance of Judas, and then there was Richard Carmichael, Marcus's business partner, a man whose booming laugh and ever-present cloud of expensive cigar smoke had once been a fixture at our dinner parties and weekend barbecues. He was portly, jovial, always ready with an avuncular pat on the back and a slightly off-color joke. I'd seen him as a harmless, almost comforting figure in our lives. A teddy bear in a bespoke suit. How wrong I was. When Marcus decided he needed unfettered access to my inheritance, the considerable fortune my parents had painstakingly built and left solely to me, Richard was his willing accomplice. He'd readily supported Marcus's claims of my financial incompetence and mental instability. His signature, bold and flourishing, appeared on affidavits attesting to my inability to manage my own affairs, paving the way for Marcus to gain conservatorship. I remember one specific dinner party, not long before everything shattered. Richard had been particularly effusive, praising Marcus's business acumen, then turning to me with a look of what I'd mistaken for kindly concern. "You mustn't worry your pretty little head about finances, Olivia, my dear," he'd boomed, his cigarillo leaving a trail of acrid smoke. "Marcus and I will take care of everything. You just focus on, well, on feeling better." His booming laugh, once a sound of conviviality, now echoed in my memory as the hollow cackle of a hyena. It was a warning siren, signaling his duplicity, his greed, his utter lack of conscience. Now, years later, in the cool, quiet sanctuary of my new life, the blue-white light of my encrypted laptop cast long shadows across my desk. The report from my private intelligence team was exhaustive. Marcus, Dr. Langley, Vanessa, Richard. The 4 cornerstones of my destruction. And now, the 4 pillars of my revenge. Their current financial situations were laid bare. Marcus's Thorn Industries was teetering on the brink of insolvency, desperately dependent on the Miss Hayes investment. Dr. Langley's once thriving private practice was riddled with debt after a messy divorce and a few quiet, out-of-court settlements for misdiagnosis. Vanessa, after a string of failed influencer ventures and ill-advised crypto investments, was being hounded by creditors, her glamorous facade crumbling. And Richard, his bravado long gone, had made a series of disastrous bets on the stock market, leaving him dangerously exposed and reliant on his dwindling shares in Thorn Industries. They were all interconnected, all ensnared, all financially tethered to the success of the very company I now held in the palm of my hand. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. The screen's glow reflected in my eyes, turning them to chips of Arctic ice. The delicious dilemma: dismantle their lives in one swift, catastrophic implosion? Or would I savor it, taking them down one by one, each act of retribution a carefully calibrated masterpiece of poetic justice? I leaned back, the leather of my chair creaking softly. Oh, I would savor it. Every single moment. The launch party for the revitalized Thorn Industries, now buoyed by Miss Hayes's visionary investment, was an exercise in opulent denial. It was held in a cavernous art gallery, the kind with soaring ceilings and stark white walls that made everyone look vaguely important. Champagne, vintage, and excessively priced, flowed like water from glittering fountains. A string quartet sawed away dutifully in a corner, their classical melodies barely audible above the cacophony of forced laughter and self-congratulatory pronouncements. I navigated the crowded space with a practiced ease, a flute of untouched champagne my only prop. My gown, a slash of sapphire silk, was designed to command attention, yet allow me to blend into the periphery when needed. I was a ghost at their feast, a silent observer cataloging every nuance, every lie. I found myself near a towering, abstract sculpture, all sharp angles and unsettling voids, rather fitting, I thought, when I saw them. Marcus, his face flushed with a combination of champagne and triumph, was holding court with a gaggle of fawning secondary investors. Richard, ever the loyal bulldog, stood slightly behind him, nodding vigorously at Marcus's pronouncements, his jowls quivering with sycophantic agreement. Their voices, amplified by the room's acoustics, carried. "Oh, absolute coup, landing Hayes," Marcus was saying, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. "Bit of an enigma, of course, but the money's real, and that's what matters, eh?" He chuckled, a self-satisfied sound that set my teeth on edge. Richard leaned in, his own voice a gravelly whisper that still managed to boom. "Still can't quite believe it's her, though. The old Olivia. Wouldn't have thought she had it in her. Always seemed a bit, you know." He tapped his temple with a thick finger, a crude, dismissive gesture. "Fragile." Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "She's playing at being a businesswoman, Richie. Thinks she's some sort of corporate titan now. It's amusing. Let her have her little moment in the sun. We'll humor her, let her sign a few papers. Then, once the company's properly stabilized, once we've leveraged her initial investment to secure more substantial backing, we'll gently ease her out. A quiet buyout, a golden handshake. She'll be too busy with her, well, you remember her episodes. She won't even notice what's happening until it's done." He smirked, and Richard joined in with a wheezing laugh. The clinking of their champagne flutes as they toasted their brilliant plan was like shards of glass against my eardrums. My past, my pain, the torment they had inflicted, reduced to a mere footnote, an amusing anecdote, a problem to be managed. A cold, calm fury settled deep within my bones, not the hot, impulsive anger of my youth, but something far more dangerous, more patient. I felt the ghost of a smile touch my own lips, hidden in the shadow of the sculpture. They had no idea who they were dealing with. This wasn't an episode. This was an execution. Later, as Marcus, ever the gracious host, made his rounds, he eventually found me. He insisted on introducing me to several key figures, potential partners, influential brokers, the kind of people whose good opinion he desperately needed. "And this," he announced, his arms sweeping towards me with a proprietary air that made my stomach churn, "is Miss Ava Hayes, our esteemed new partner. The visionary who saw the potential in Thorn Industries when others perhaps hesitated. His smile was wide, charming, utterly false. I played my part with demure perfection. I was the silent, supportive investor, the woman of means, but perhaps not of overwhelming business acumen. I smiled graciously, my eyes slightly downcast, a picture of modest deference. I offered a soft, almost shy handshake. I murmured polite, non-committal phrases. "Marcus is the true visionary," I'd say, my voice a gentle breath. "I'm merely fortunate to be able to support his endeavors." The heavy string of pearls at my throat, a family heirloom that had once adorned my mother, felt like a protective talisman, cool and smooth against my skin. Each pearl was a reminder of the legacy they'd tried to steal, the strength they'd failed to extinguish. It was my armor. For the occasion, I'd chosen a perfume with deliberate, malicious intent. Not one of my new, sophisticated scents, the ones that spoke of power and independence. Instead, I'd unearthed a tiny, almost forgotten vial of fleur de roquet, a light, ethereal floral I had worn frequently in the early, happier days of our marriage, a scent Marcus had once claimed to adore. As I was introduced to a particularly oily financier, I allowed my wrist to brush lightly against Marcus's hand as I reached for a canapé. I saw the flicker in his eyes, a momentary confusion, a shadow of some deeply buried memory. His smile tightened at the edges. His practiced charm faltered for a fraction of a second. He didn't comment, of course. He wouldn't dare draw attention to it. But the seed was planted. A tiny, unsettling reminder of the past he thought he'd successfully buried. He quickly recovered, his laughter a little too loud, his grip on his champagne flute a little too tight. But I knew the ghost of Olivia was in the room and she was wearing my perfume. The following Monday morning, the real work began. My countermove. I'd arranged a private breakfast meeting with Mr. Alastair Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Global, the venture's largest and most critical prospective client. Not in the sterile confines of a boardroom, but at a discreet, old-world hotel, renowned for its privacy and its impeccable blueberry scones. Mr. Harrison was a man of immense caution, a pillar of the old-school business community, known for his integrity and his aversion to unnecessary risk. I didn't arrive armed with accusations or spreadsheets. I arrived with an air of quiet concern, of someone who had stumbled upon troubling information and felt a moral obligation to share it. Mr. Harrison, I began, my voice soft, tinged with just the right amount of reluctance. I do hope you'll forgive my directness. As a new investor in Thorn Industries, I've been doing my own due diligence naturally. And some patterns in Marcus Thorne's previous business dealings have given me pause. I didn't need to spell out the details of Marcus's string of failed enterprises, the whispers of unpaid creditors, the conveniently timed bankruptcies that had left partners and smaller investors in the lurch. The information was out there, albeit buried, for anyone diligent enough to look. Instead, I asked innocent, carefully phrased questions. I'm sure there are perfectly reasonable explanations, but I was a little puzzled by the rapid dissolution of Thorn Creative Solutions some years back, and the rather abrupt departure of his CFO at Texas Ventures just before its acquisition. A underscore acquisition, which I understand yielded very little for the initial backers underscore. I slid a slim, unmarked folder across the polished mahogany table. It contained a few judiciously selected, publicly available but difficult-to-find news clippings and financial summaries. I came across these, I said, my expression one of earnest, almost apologetic concern. And as someone now significantly invested alongside you, Mr. Harrison, I felt it was only right, only prudent, to share my slight unease, purely out of concern for the stability and integrity of this new venture, of course. The antique leather chair creaked softly as I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering, sincere. I wasn't accusing. I was merely sharing a burden. Seeds of doubt planted in fertile, cautious ground. The fallout was as swift and devastating as a summer storm. By lunchtime, word reached me. Mr. Harrison had put an immediate and indefinite hold on the Harrison Global deal. He was reevaluating. Panic erupted within the newly optimistic halls of Thorn Industries. My phone began to ring incessantly. First, a frantic, sputtering call from Marcus, his voice tight with disbelief and barely suppressed fury. "What the hell did you say to him, Olivia? Ava, he was all set to sign." Then came Richard, his usual booming joviality replaced by a wheezing, panicked desperation. "The whole deal's collapsing. Harrison's spooked. This is a disaster. We're ruined." They were hemorrhaging credibility, and the other potential investors, smelling blood in the water, were backing away. I let them twist in the wind for a full 24 hours, imagining their frantic phone calls, their recriminations, their dawning terror. Then, I made my move. I requested a meeting. In Marcus's office, the one that still bore the faint imprint of my past taste in its decor, a subtle irony that didn't escape me. They looked like cornered animals. Marcus was pale, his eyes bloodshot. Richard was slumped in a chair, his face gray, his expensive tie askew. This is a setback, I acknowledged calmly, taking the seat Marcus hadn't offered me. However, it's not insurmountable. Hope flickered in their eyes. Mr. Harrison is a man of caution. He was clearly unsettled. But I believe I can salvage this. In fact, I paused, letting the silence stretch. I believe I can bring in an even larger client, a more stable, more lucrative partner. My connections, the ones I've cultivated as Miss Hayes, run deep and wide. Their relief was palpable. Marcus almost sagged. Anything, he breathed. Whatever it takes. Of course, I continued, my voice smooth as silk. Such an undertaking, such a significant recovery, would necessitate a restructuring of my role within the company. I named my terms. A significantly larger share of the equity. A seat on the board, naturally, but more importantly, direct operational oversight. Veto power on all major financial decisions. Effectively, Richard, the loyal, complicit Richard, would be neutered. A partner in name only, his influence eradicated. The sunlight streaming through the vertical blinds of Marcus's office cast stark, prison-bar shadows across their desperate, contorted faces as they exchanged a look of horrified understanding, then slowly, reluctantly, nodded their assent. They had no other choice. Richard caught me by the elevator, his face a mask of crumbling bravado and naked fear. The scent of stale cigar smoke and flop sweat clung to him. "Olivia, Miss Hayes, please," he stammered, his jowls trembling. "You have to believe me. I was manipulated by Marcus. He twisted everything about you, about your health." His eyes, small and shifty, darted around as if expecting Marcus to materialize from the polished chrome of the elevator doors. I paused, my finger hovering over the call button. I turned to him, my expression utterly devoid of emotion. "Richard," I said, my voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of years of silent condemnation. "Let me ask you something. In all that time, did you ever once pick up the phone? Did you ever once seek me out, ask for my side of the story? When Marcus was spinning his narrative of my instability, did you ever, for even a fleeting moment, question it? Did you ever consider that perhaps, just perhaps, he was the one who was lying?" His silence was a gaping wound, an admission more damning than any confession. He stared at his expensive, scuffed shoes, unable to meet my gaze. The booming laugh, the jovial facade, had completely crumbled, leaving behind a pathetic, cowardly shell of a man. "I thought not," I said softly, the words like chips of ice. Just then, my phone vibrated in my clutch. I glanced at the screen. A message notification. "Liv! Oh my God, it's been absolutely ages! So thrilled to hear you're back in town and wow, involved with Marcus's new venture. Amazing. We absolutely have to reconnect. Coffee and a long overdue catch-up soon? Let me know. Isigavisa. Vanessa, so blissfully, so utterly, so predictably unaware." A cold, predatory smile touched my lips. Her timing was impeccable. She was next on the agenda. The game, I thought with a thrill of anticipation, was truly afoot. Vanessa, true to her word, arranged our long overdue catch-up with an alacrity that spoke volumes of her desperation. She chose Le Petit Coin, a bustling, achingly trendy cafe in the financial district, a place where the clatter of cups and the hum of self-important conversations provided a convenient smokescreen for indiscreet inquiries. She was already there when I arrived, perched precariously on a tiny, uncomfortable-looking metal stool, her eyes, magnified by oversized designer sunglasses she kept pushing up her nose, darting around the room with the nervous energy of a hummingbird trapped in a jar. She'd ordered a pot of herbal tea and was meticulously, almost obsessively, squeezing a tiny plastic bear of honey into her cup, the sticky golden goo dripping slowly, a perfect visual metaphor for the transparent sweetness of her impending performance. "Liv, darling!" she gushed, leaping up to embrace me in a cloud of her signature honeysuckle perfume, a scent that now felt like a suffocating miasma of deceit. Her hug was a brittle, awkward affair. "You look absolutely incredible. Honestly, a total powerhouse. I'm so proud of everything you're doing with Marcus's company. It's just inspiring. Her smile was a rictus, stretched a little too wide, her eyes holding a predatory gleam that she probably thought looked like adoring friendship. Remorse was the initial flavor of her act, swiftly followed by an overwhelming desire to be seen as my closest, most trusted confidant once more. I settled into the chair opposite her, offering a small, slightly weary smile. Vani, it's been a while. I allowed a note of old affection to creep into my voice, a carefully calibrated dose of nostalgia. You look well. A lie, of course. She looked strung out, the expensive clothes failing to conceal the fine lines of stress around her eyes and mouth. Oh, she waved a dismissive hand, her charm bracelets jangling. Trying to keep it all together, but Liv, honestly, I felt so awful about everything, the past, how things went down. I wasn't myself. Marcus, he can be very persuasive, very overwhelming. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. I was foolish, and I missed you terribly. The performance was flawless if you didn't know the actress. I feigned forgiveness with a magnanimity that would have won awards. I played the role of the slightly wounded but ultimately understanding friend, the one who had risen above past hurts. Oh, Vani, I sighed, reaching across the tiny table to pat her hand reassuringly. It was a difficult time, for everyone. Let's not dwell on it. I then proceeded to share vague, utterly meaningless confidences about the new venture, painting myself as a little overwhelmed by the complexities of high finance, a little out of my depth despite my newfound wealth. It's all rather dizzying, to be honest, I confessed with a self-deprecating little laugh. Marcus is such a force of nature, and Richard is Richard. Sometimes I feel like I'm just paddling furiously to keep my head above water. To complete the illusion of returning to my former, more pliable self, I deliberately styled my hair in a softer, looser way, reminiscent of how I used to wear it years ago, before the institution, before the reinvention. It was a subtle cue, designed to lull her into a false sense of security, to trigger her underestimation of me. Let her see the old Olivia, the one she'd so easily manipulated and betrayed. The scent of freshly baked croissants from the cafe counter mingled with Vanessa's cloying honeysuckle perfume, creating a nauseating olfactory cocktail that perfectly mirrored the dissonance of our conversation. Oh, Liv, you can tell me anything. Vanessa leaned in, her eyes gleaming with an unholy curiosity. You know I'm always here for you, your oldest friend. What's really going on with this new client, the big one you snagged after Harrison pulled out? And this new software Marcus keeps mentioning? It sounds revolutionary. Is it as game-changing as he says? Her questions were casual, almost too casual, woven into the fabric of her feigned concern. Trust her. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. While she spun her saccharine tales of regret and undying loyalty, I was meticulously, dispassionately gathering the threads of her treachery. The tiny, state-of-the-art recording device nestled in the lining of my handbag captured every honeyed word, every carefully phrased, probing question. It was voice-activated, its microphone capable of isolating her speech, even amidst the cafe's considerable din. My tech team, a discreet and highly efficient group I paid exceedingly well, had already, with surprising ease, flagged her recent communications. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. She wasn't just idly fishing for gossip to peddle to her dwindling social circle. She was actively trying to acquire sensitive, proprietary information about Thorn Industries, specifically about our new flagship software platform and the details of the multi-million-dollar contract with our new primary client. Her digital footprint showed encrypted communications with a known broker of corporate intelligence, a sleazy little operative who specialized in selling secrets to the highest bidder. And, even more deliciously, she was still in cahoots with Marcus. A little side hustle they'd concocted, a plan to siphon off a percentage of the new client's payments through a series of offshore shell corporations. His greed, it seemed, knew no bounds, and Vanessa was his willing, if somewhat inept, accomplice. The soft, almost inaudible hum of my recorder, masked by the clatter of crockery and the hiss of the espresso machine, was the silent, damning soundtrack to her impending self-immolation. She thought she was playing me. In reality, she was composing her own swan song. The emergency board meeting was convened at my explicit request a week later. Marcus arrived looking harried and irritable, clearly annoyed by the disruption to his schedule. Richard Carmichael, now a largely decorative presence on the board, waddled in looking perpetually bewildered. Vanessa, invited under the carefully constructed pretext of discussing a potential and entirely fictional public relations consultancy role for Thorne Industries, arrived flushed with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She probably envisioned a fat retainer and a triumphant return to some semblance of financial stability. She even wore a new, rather garish power suit for the occasion. I remained seated at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, my hands folded calmly in my lap, a picture of serene authority. "Thank you all for assembling on such short notice," I began, my voice cool and even, cutting through the expectant silence. "It has come to my attention, through channels I must unfortunately keep confidential, that there has been a significant and ongoing breach of corporate security. Information of a highly sensitive and proprietary nature appears to have been deliberately leaked, potentially amounting to a clear case of industrial espionage." A ripple of shock and consternation went around the table. Marcus scoffed, a dismissive, arrogant sound. "Don't be ridiculous, Ava. What are you insinuating? Thorne Industries has state-of-the-art security protocols." His eyes narrowed. "Is this another one of your dramatic pronouncements?" "I'm not insinuating anything, Marcus," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "I'm stating facts, and I have proof." I gave a subtle nod to my assistant, a discreet young woman with an unnervingly calm demeanor, who was seated by the audiovisual controls. "If you would, Miss Albright." The large screen at the end of the boardroom flickered to life, and then the recordings began to play. Vanessa's voice, clear and unmistakable despite the background cafe noise. Her voice offering details of our software's unique architecture to a man whose responses clearly indicated he was a competitor's agent. Her voice discussing timelines, potential vulnerabilities, even pricing structures. Then, even more damningly, recordings of subsequent encrypted calls between Vanessa and Marcus. Their voices plotting to divert a percentage of the incoming payments from our new major client into an untraceable offshore account. Discussing percentages. Laughing. The hum of the high-end audio system seemed to vibrate through my very bones with a deeply satisfying resonance. Chaos erupted. Vanessa turned a ghastly shade of puce, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, incoherent denials tumbling out. Richard looked as if he might have a coronary, his hand clutching his chest. The other board members, seasoned, cynical men and women who had seen their share of corporate backstabbing, stared aghast. First at the screen, then at Vanessa, then at Marcus, whose face had become a rigid mask of fury and dawning, horrified realization. When the final recording clicked off, a suffocating silence descended upon the room, broken only by Vanessa's choked sobs. "I believe," I said into the stillness, my voice carrying the weight of absolute, undeniable truth, "that these recordings speak for themselves. Industrial espionage, attempted fraud, collusion." Each word was a hammer blow. Later that day, after the initial firestorm had swept through Thorne Industries, after Vanessa had been unceremoniously escorted from the building by security, her career in tatters and legal charges pending, Marcus cornered me in the hallway outside my office. He looked utterly broken, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. The arrogant, dismissive veneer had been stripped away, leaving behind a desperate, pleading wreck of a man. "Olivia, Ava, please," he begged, his voice hoarse, raw. He actually reached out as if to grab my arm, then seemed to think better of it. "We need to talk, privately. You don't understand. There's more to this whole story, things you don't know, things that might explain." I met his gaze, my own cool, unyielding. A faint, ironic smile played on my lips. "There always is, isn't there, Marcus?" I responded, my voice soft, yet laced with a chilling finality. Another layer, another excuse, another betrayal lurking just beneath the surface. The question hung in the air, heavy and ominous. What other secrets was he still desperately trying to conceal? What other unpleasant truths remained buried, waiting to be unearthed? And more importantly, was there something, some crucial element, that I, in my meticulously crafted plan for retribution, had somehow overlooked? Or was this simply the last pathetic thrashing of a drowning man? The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, innocuous amidst the usual flurry of market reports and internal memos. Subject: Company Wellness Initiative. Introduction of lead consultant. My cursor hovered over it for a moment, a vague sense of unease prickling the back of my neck. Marcus had been suspiciously quiet since Vanessa's spectacular implosion. Too quiet. He was plotting something. His silences were always more dangerous than his outbursts. I clicked it open. A blandly corporate announcement detailed the engagement of a renowned psychological consultant to assess and enhance executive mental fitness and workplace harmony. Standard corporate fluff. Then I scrolled down to the consultant's biography and attached photograph. Dr. Alistair Langley. The name leaped off the screen like a striking viper. My breath hitched. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. For a dizzying, disorienting moment, the sleek, modern lines of my corner office seemed to waver and distort, the hum of the city traffic far below fading to a dull roar. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly felt unbearably harsh, each one a cruel interrogator's glare. Dr. Langley, here, hired by Marcus, to evaluate my mental fitness. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just a power play, it was a declaration of war. A deliberate, contemptuous attempt to drag me back into the very nightmare he and Langley had orchestrated years ago. He was testing me, daring me to crack, to react, to prove his twisted narrative right. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. He actually believed, after everything, that he could still control me, still define me, still break me with the same tired, insidious tools. The ice in my veins began to burn, a slow, frigid fire of renewed resolve. He had no idea how badly he had just miscalculated. This wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity. He was bringing the final piece of the puzzle directly to me. I agreed to the initial consultation with Dr. Langley, of course. I feigned a mild cooperative interest. Executive mental fitness sounds intriguing, I'd told Marcus's overly solicitous assistant. Anything to enhance team cohesion. The meeting was scheduled for the following week in a sterile, impersonal conference room on one of the lower floors. A deliberate choice, I suspected, to subtly undermine my authority, to place me on his turf. I walked in with an air of serene, almost placid cooperation. I even wore a simple, understated dress in a pale rose color, a far cry from my usual power suits. And for my perfume, a light, almost imperceptible touch of a classic white floral, a scent I knew from a long-ago trivial snippet of conversation during one of our ghastly therapy sessions, reminded him of his sainted mother. Let him underestimate me. Let him see the docile, slightly fragile Olivia he remembered, the one he'd so easily dismissed and drugged into submission. He sat behind a large, imposing mahogany table that wasn't his, a pathetic attempt to project authority. His thinning hair was meticulously combed, his suit impeccably tailored, but his eyes, those cold, assessing eyes, held the same unsettling blend of feigned empathy and clinical detachment I remembered with a visceral lurch. His pen, a sleek silver instrument, was poised over a fresh, crisp notepad. The expensive leather of the notebook cover crackled faintly each time he shifted, a sound that echoed the dry rustle of the commitment papers he'd once so readily signed. His questions were a masterclass in subtle, manipulative interrogation. Each one was carefully designed to probe for perceived weaknesses, to elicit an emotional, unstable response, to gently guide me towards incriminating myself, to paint me once again as psychologically unsound. "Tell me, Miss Hayes," he began, his voice the same soothing, anodyne baritone that had once lulled me into a false sense of security. "How have you been truly coping with the considerable pressures of your new and very demanding role? Any undue anxiety, sleeplessness, feelings of being overwhelmed perhaps. He'd ask about my interpersonal dynamics with the board, my stress management techniques, my emotional regulation. He'd circle back again and again to my past, to the difficult period I had endured, his tone dripping with a sickeningly false compassion. It must be challenging, he'd murmur, to step into such a high-stakes environment after everything you've been through. I answered each question calmly, thoughtfully, my voice even, my gaze direct. I offered carefully constructed responses, revealing nothing of substance, yet appearing open and cooperative. I subtly noted each leading question, each unethical probe, each veiled insinuation. I was no longer the broken, terrified woman cowering in his sterile office. I was a collector of evidence, a silent, meticulous chronicler of his malpractice. He was digging his own grave, one condescending question at a time. He thought he was evaluating me. He had no idea he was the one under scrutiny. The light floral scent I noted with grim satisfaction seemed to be working. He was becoming increasingly complacent, his questions more overtly biased, his professional mask slipping to reveal the arrogant charlatan beneath. The crackle of his notebook as he turned a page, marking down what he undoubtedly believed was the further proof of my fragility, was the sound of his career slowly, inexorably dying. The next board meeting was convened under the pretext of Langley presenting his preliminary findings on executive well-being. Marcus sat at the table looking insufferably smug, a small, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Dr. Langley, seated beside him, adopted an expression of grave, professional concern, his notepad placed squarely before him. Richard Carmichael, who had somehow managed to cling to his board seat despite his effective neutering, looked nervous and out of his depth, as usual. They were all expecting a carefully crafted report, a clinical assassination, recommending that Miss Hayes, for her own well-being and the stability of the company, should take an extended leave of absence, perhaps seek further supportive therapy. A polite, professionally sanctioned coup. I let Langley begin his preamble, his voice droning on about observed stress indicators and potential risk factors. Then, just as he was about to launch into his specific assessment of me, I raised a hand, a calm, authoritative gesture that cut him off mid-sentence. "Excuse me, Dr. Langley Marcus," I began, my voice clear and resonant in the suddenly silent room. "Before Dr. Langley proceeds with his analysis, I believe I have an announcement of my own that might provide some necessary context." All eyes swiveled towards me, a mixture of surprise and irritation on Marcus's face, a flicker of unease in Langley's. "For some time now," I continued, rising slowly to my feet, feeling a surge of power, of long-suppressed truth, finally breaking free. "You have all known me primarily as Ava Hayes, an investor in this company. But that, as some of you are beginning to suspect, is not my whole story. It is not even my real name." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, savoring the dawning confusion on their faces. "My full name," I declared, my voice ringing with a strength I hadn't known I possessed, "is Olivia Annabelle Hayes Blackwood, and I am the primary heir to the Blackwood family estate, and following the recent retirement of its esteemed long-term director, I am now the acting head of the Blackwood Foundation for Behavioral Health Oversight." A collective gasp went around the room. Stunned, absolute silence descended. Marcus's jaw literally dropped, his face turning a ghastly shade of white. Langley's pen clattered from his nerveless fingers onto the polished mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Richard looked as if he might faint. The Blackwood Foundation. The name was a legend in psychiatric and legal circles, a powerful, heavily endowed, and fiercely independent organization renowned for its relentless pursuit of psychiatric malpractice, its exposure of unethical practitioners, and its unwavering advocacy for victims of wrongful diagnosis and commitment. They were the watchdogs, the ones who held the medical establishment accountable. They were, to men like Langley, the stuff of nightmares. "My death in that institution, Marcus," I continued, my eyes locking onto his, watching the terror bloom there, "was not a tragic end, but a carefully orchestrated escape. It was facilitated by the former director of the Blackwood Foundation, a brilliant and compassionate man who, upon reviewing the details of my case, details anonymously provided by a conscience-stricken nurse, recognized it immediately for what it was: a gross, malicious, and financially motivated act of wrongful commitment. My rebirth was not some mystical transformation, Marcus. It was my reclaiming of my life, my sanity, and my very substantial inheritance. An inheritance, by the way, that makes my investment in your little company look like pocket change. The immense, crushing weight that had sat upon my chest for so many years, the suffocating burden of his lies and their complicity, finally, blessedly, lifted. I was speaking my truth, and the sound of it was the most liberating music I had ever known. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I announced, my voice ringing with the undeniable authority of the Blackwood name, the Foundation has initiated a full, comprehensive, and, I assure you, deeply invasive review of Dr. Alistair Langley's entire professional practice, his patient files, his billing records, his correspondence. Starting, of course, with my own meticulously documented case. At that precise moment, as if on cue, the boardroom doors opened, and my legal team, a phalanx of sharp, determined lawyers from the Foundation's litigation department, entered armed with subpoenas, court orders, and an air of grim, implacable purpose. "We have already uncovered significant irregularities, Dr. Langley," I said, turning my cool gaze upon him. He looked like a man facing his executioner. A disturbing pattern, it seems, of conveniently diagnosing articulate, inconvenient women with paranoid delusions, emotional instability, or histrionic personality disorder, often at the behest of their wealthy, influential husbands or associates who wish to silence or control them. "Your methods, doctor, are about to become very public." The afternoon sun, which had been struggling to break through the city haze, suddenly streamed through the tall boardroom windows, illuminating the stacks of files my team began to methodically place upon the table. Years of Langley's carefully constructed career, his web of deceit, about to be unraveled, exposed, and utterly dismantled, case by damning, heartbreaking case. The power shift in the room was absolute, a seismic tremor that reconfigured the entire landscape. Marcus, no longer the smug puppet master, sat slumped in his chair, his face ashen, the fight completely drained from him. He looked like a deflated balloon, his empire of lies collapsing around him. Dr. Langley, stripped of his clinical arrogance, was stammering, incoherent, his carefully cultivated professional persona shattering into a million pieces. He was facing not just financial ruin and the loss of his license, but potential criminal charges. The investigation by the Blackwood Foundation would be swift, brutal, and mercilessly thorough. The other board members, sensing the cataclysmic shift, were already subtly distancing themselves, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning, self-preservatory horror. The news spread like wildfire. Richard Carmichael, I learned within hours, had cleaned out his office, his apartment, and boarded a one-way flight to a small, non-extradition treaty nation in the Caribbean, leaving a trail of bad debts and bewildered creditors. Vanessa, ever the opportunist, was already, according to my sources, frantically pitching a sensationalized, ghost-written tell-all memoir to the tabloid press, attempting to rebrand herself as yet another tragic victim of Marcus Thorne's diabolical manipulations. Later that evening, comfortably ensconced in my penthouse apartment, I watched a breaking news alert flash across the screen of my tablet. Prominent city psychiatrist Dr. Alistair Langley under investigation by Blackwood Foundation amid allegations of malpractice and wrongful commitment. Sources link inquiry to recent shakeup at Thorne Industries. The cool blue light of the screen illuminated my calm, almost serene expression as the carefully constructed empires of my former tormentors crumbled into dust around them. My personal revenge was sweet, undeniably. But this was bigger. This was justice, and it was only the beginning. The first of the fallen angels to seek an audience was, predictably, Marcus. He didn't call, he didn't request a meeting through his lawyers, who were undoubtedly scrambling to mitigate the avalanche of legal and financial woes now burying him. He simply appeared, unannounced, at the private, unmarked entrance to the Blackwood Foundation's headquarters, looking like a wraith spat out by a particularly violent storm. The impeccable Italian suits, the confident swagger, the carefully cultivated air of a man in perpetual control, all gone. In their place was a rumpled, unshaven creature in a creased shirt, his expensive designer suit hanging on his now gaunt frame as if on a scarecrow. The dark circles under his eyes were cavernous, a stark, bruised contrast to the gaudy, diamond-encrusted watch that still clung to his wrist, a pathetic relic of a life that had evaporated. He looked diminished, smaller, and utterly terrified. He was ushered not into my grand office, but into a small, anonymous meeting room, deliberately chosen for its lack of comfort and its sterile ambiance. He didn't even attempt his usual bluster, his manipulative charm. That well had run dry. He sat, or rather slumped, onto the edge of a hard chair, his hands twisting in his lap like frightened animals. He offered a full, unvarnished confession. Every sordid detail of his systematic gaslighting, his calculated cruelty, his philandering, his theft of my inheritance, his conspiracy with Langley, his cynical manipulation of Vanessa and Richard. He laid it all bare, the words tumbling out in a desperate, pathetic torrent, each admission a fresh stain on his already blackened soul. I was a monster, Olivia. Ava, he choked out, his voice raspy, broken. Driven by greed, by ego, by some twisted need to control everything, everyone, especially you. Because you were better than me and I couldn't stand it. He offered to testify against Langley to provide irrefutable evidence against Richard's offshore dealings, even to detail Vanessa's willing participation in their smaller frauds. He'd give me everything, everyone, if I would just show him mercy. Some small, insignificant chance to salvage a shred of his life from the smoldering wreckage. A plea deal, a reduced sentence, just don't let them destroy me completely, he pleaded, actual tears, thick and oily, tracing paths through the stubble on his cheeks. I listened in silence, my expression unreadable, my hands resting calmly on the cool glass surface of the table. I watched him unravel, this man, who had once held my entire world in his cruel, careless hands. I felt nothing. No triumph. No pity. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where my love for him and then my hatred had once resided. When his pathetic litany finally sputtered to a close, when he sat there, a hollowed-out shell of a man awaiting my judgment, I leaned forward slightly. His eyes, filled with a desperate, flickering hope, met mine. "No, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet, devoid of any inflection. Just a simple, unequivocal negation. The hope in his eyes died, snuffed out like a candle in a gale. Dr. Alistair Langley, ever the consummate professional even in the face of his own immolation, attempted a more clinical approach. He requested a formal meeting through his beleaguered legal counsel, who were already drowning in a sea of malpractice lawsuits and damning evidence unearthed by the Foundation's investigators. He arrived punctually, his thinning hair plastered to his scalp, his face a mask of strained composure. He didn't beg. He didn't confess. He rationalized. He attempted to frame his systematic destruction of my sanity, and likely that of many other women, as standard clinical practice within the accepted diagnostic paradigms of the time. He spoke with a chilling detachment of complex patient presentations, of the inherent subjectivity in psychiatric assessment, of the challenging burden of care when dealing with highly emotional female patients. His voice was still that smooth, condescending baritone, but now there was a tremor beneath it, a subtle quaver that betrayed the terror he was so desperately trying to conceal. His hand, the one that wasn't clutching a worn leather briefcase presumably stuffed with self-serving justifications, trembled almost imperceptibly as he repeatedly pushed his heavy-rimmed glasses further up the bridge of his nose. The gesture, once one of professorial authority, now seemed merely nervous, a telltale sign of his crumbling facade. He even had the audacity to offer me a quid pro quo. "A public retraction, Miss Hayes Blackwood," he proposed, his voice attempting a tone of magnanimous concession. "A full, unequivocal statement affirming your mental acuity and emotional stability. I would be prepared to state that my initial diagnosis was perhaps overly cautious, made under duress from external pressures." He was offering to clear my name, as if his tainted words held any value now, as if that could somehow erase the years of torment, the stolen time, the deep psychic wounds he had inflicted. He was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to bargain his way out of the abyss. I let him finish his carefully rehearsed speech, his clinical rationalizations hanging in the sterile air like a foul odor. Then I met his gaze, my own as hard and unyielding as granite. "No, Dr. Langley," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of the fury that had once consumed me when I thought of him. He flinched as if struck. His carefully constructed composure seemed to crack, revealing the frightened, morally bankrupt man beneath. Then came Vanessa. Always the actress, she opted for a dramatic, tearful ambush. She somehow managed to find out which quiet, out-of-the-way artisanal bakery I frequented for my morning coffee and croissant. A small betrayal by a former acquaintance, no doubt, that I would deal with later. She appeared as I was about to take my first sip, a vision in artfully distressed denim and oversized sunglasses, clutching a battered photo album to her chest like a shield. Tears, remarkably realistic, welled in her eyes as she approached my small corner table. "Liv! Oh, Liv, thank God I found you!" she wailed, her voice choked with carefully manufactured emotion. She didn't ask to sit. She simply collapsed into the opposite chair, the photo album landing on the table with a soft thud. She launched into a desperate, rambling monologue, a rehashed version of her cafe performance, but this time with added props and heightened melodrama. She, too, had been a victim, she claimed, a pawn in Marcus's cruel games. He'd manipulated her, twisted her love and concern for me into something ugly, forced her to testify against me. "He threatened me, Liv. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't back him up." The old photographs were produced, one by one, faded snapshots of us in our college dorm room, goofy smiles and bad haircuts. A picture of her as my maid of honor, beaming beside me at my wedding to Marcus, a chilling reminder of her proximity to my deepest betrayals. The ice in the untouched iced latte she'd theatrically ordered clinked against the glass as her shoulders shook with strategic, heart-wrenching sobs. Her mascara, impeccably waterproof this time, remained defiantly intact. "I miss you, Liv," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed and likely non-existent tears, reaching a trembling hand across the table towards mine. "I miss my best friend. Can't we ever go back?" I looked at her, at the carefully orchestrated performance, the crocodile tears, the pathetic props, and I felt a profound weariness. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, clear understanding of her pathetic, self-serving nature. I gently pulled my hand away before she could touch it. "No, Vanessa," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle, but utterly final. The word, so small, so simple, seemed to suck all the air out of her performance. Her sobs hitched. Her eyes, for a moment, lost their theatrical grief and flickered with a raw, animal panic. To each of them, Marcus, the fallen tycoon; Langley, the disgraced psychiatrist; Vanessa, the weeping Judas. My response was the same. A simple, unadorned, unembellished no. No lengthy explanations, no justifications. No emotional outbursts, no gloating, no satisfaction in their ruin. Just a quiet, peaceful, unshakable certainty. The word hung in the air between us, more powerful, more absolute, more devastating than any grandiloquent speech or vengeful tirade could ever be. It was the sound of a door irrevocably, eternally closed. It was the sound of my freedom. It was the sound of their irrelevance. Marcus had stared, his face crumbling into utter despair. Langley had deflated, his clinical mask finally shattering. Vanessa's tears had abruptly ceased, replaced by a look of cold, hard calculation as she realized her performance had failed. The legal proceedings against them, and against the crumbling edifice of Thorne Industries, ground onward, swift and inexorable. Marcus faced a barrage of fraud charges, civil suits from duped investors, and the very real prospect of a long prison sentence. Langley's license was permanently revoked. He was a pariah in the medical community, facing financial ruin and likely criminal charges for his role in multiple cases of malpractice. The Foundation was now aggressively pursuing. Vanessa, for all her histrionics, found herself entangled in Marcus's financial deceptions, her claims of victimhood shredded by the evidence of her willing collusion. As the wheels of justice turned relentlessly, An unexpected letter arrived to the Blackwood Foundation, addressed personally to me. It was handwritten, on plain, inexpensive lined paper, the script neat but hesitant. It was from a woman I had never met. Her story, outlined in heart-wrenching, chillingly familiar detail, mirrored my own. The names of her tormentors? Marcus Thorne, who had been her employer and lover. Dr. Alistair Langley, who had diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder when she threatened to expose Marcus's illegal business practices. The pattern, sickeningly, continued. The question, no longer a whisper of my own conscience, but a clarion call from another wounded soul, now blazed with an undeniable clarity. My personal vendetta was complete. My tormentors were facing their reckoning. But was my mission, the mission of the Blackwood Foundation, just beginning? Could I, extend this fight for justice beyond the confines of my own painful history? The letter trembled slightly in my hand.